Hello and what is up YouTube? My name is G3Iron and welcome to today's discussion where we are talking about Settlers of Kalguur, which is going to be the upcoming 325 League expansion that is coming later on this month in July. Today I've got 10 things that I wanted to mention, 2 things that we can say for sure about this upcoming 325 League, and then 8 things that we can speculate about. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts down below in the comments about what you're sure about regarding this upcoming Settlers expansion and what you are also going to be speculating about with the upcoming Kalguur Settlers expansion. So I'm going to appear big and boisterous and confident here as I say 2 things definitely for sure. We can know 2 things based off of the immediate release and teaser trailer. We are now full on into T season now. We're starting T season. I feel like this is a little bit early, but we can say for sure that July 26th, we will have 325 as a league, and July 18th, we will have the full information download, dump, teaser, preview of the league. Now that's only about a week away from each other in terms of the timeline, which means I expect there to be leaks not quite on a daily basis, but on a semi-regular basis in between now and the 18th, when we'll have a whole bunch of information and be able to preview and plan out all of our builds that we're going to be enjoying throughout the rest of the summer holiday sort of mid-years gaming experience and mid-years update for Path of Exile. I'm going to have to start saying Path of Exile 1 now, aren't I? For the mid-years update for Path of Exile 1, because eventually it's going to be the Path of Exile 2 mid-year update. But anyway, more on that in a bit. Besides for the dates that we know are set in stone for later on in July, the release for 325, we can also say that the lore for this expansion is going to tie in some way back into Expedition. So, if you are interested in following the lore or in digging for clues, Kitten Cat Noodle's got an entire lore series that will be linked down below. You can click on that video in order to do the deep dive into the lore. There's a whole massive tome worth of lore information that's also available. I'll link to that. So if you prefer to listen, you can listen to Kitten Cat Noodles. If you'd prefer to read, then you can read the lore compendium of all the POE lore and just jump around and make your own speculative stuff. But we know for certain, based off of the NPCs that are shown in the trailer, that in some way there is going to be a lore tie between Settlers of Kalguur and the people that we know of that we've met in the past from Expedition that are related to Kalguur. All right, so enough about the things that we can say for sure. Let's talk about the things that we can just speculate about. So first off, Boat League. You're going to see a lot of memes, a lot of comments on YouTube, on Reddit, on Twitch, on the forums, etc. Folks just talking about how this is the final, fabled, at last arriving Boat League, the long prophesied, long expected Boat League. Okay, here's the thing. Yes, there's a boat in the teaser, and yes, boats are just around Ray Class and around Path of Exile. But here's the thing. Boats show up oftentimes throughout Path of Exile League teasers, whether that's for Heist in the past, whether that's for Expedition, whether that's for Necropolis, whether that's for a whole wide range of things. Boats have featured like celestial floating boats as well as like just regular traditional boats on the ocean of Ray Class, you know, Darmok and Jalad on the ocean sort of thing. So boats have featured heavily in teasers as well as in previews. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a pirate-themed league, a boat-themed league, a shipping and trading-themed league, a throw your tea into the Boston, harbor sort of league. But that being said, maybe it will be. Maybe. So we can speculate about Boat League all that we would like up until it's been fully confirmed that our characters will definitely be operating on land and will not be island hopping from one island to the next on Ray Class and doing various missions and sorts of things. But maybe so. So we can speculate about that. All right, a second thing we can speculate about is whether or not Settlers of Kalguur will return to a pattern that GGG used to use and used to employ in a rather successful period of Path of Exile 1's history, which was GGG for a time essentially took a look at different styles and different genres of games, whether it was tower defense relating to Blight, whether it was sort of a Carcassonne sort of approach with synthesis, whether it was vastly different styles of tower defense games with the Ancients, right? There's lots of different ways that Grinding Gear Games has employed other forms of gaming genres and imported them into a Path of Exile sort of spin on those gaming genres. Now, here's the thing. If this is a return to that, I am very excited because to me, there's no better peak in Path of Exile's history than like from 2019 through like late 2020, early 2021. Those 2 years, maybe even 3 years, you want to include 2018, like those 3 years of Path of Exile, in my mind, when I think of peak Path of Exile, like league after league was just awesome in terms of balance, in terms of theming, and in terms of content. There were a few misses here and there. We can debate what those were, but in terms of a solid 3 years, I think those 3 years are probably the best 3 years of PoE 1 that we can talk about. And so if Settlers of Kalguur is a Settlers of Catan, or a maybe like the Settlers franchise that is run and operated by Ubisoft, if that is kind of the direction that this league is going to go, which is a genre of game that inspires a league, and now it's got Grinding Gear Games developers kind of putting their fingerprints all over it and making it uniquely Ray class, then that's got 2 thumbs up for me. I love that sort of thing. Stealth games, right? Do you remember when Heist was announced? Like we were talking about Splinter Cell and, and all sorts of different Heist style, silent, stealthy sorts of games. I was incredibly excited for that. To see how Grinding Gear Games could possibly, in an action RPG, put a stealth style element of game together. Now, we saw that Heist went in a totally different direction. Within like the first day or two of Heist League, it completely changed from a stealth style operative, Ocean's 11 style break in and get out without allowing, any alarm bells to go off, to a, well, just choose when you want the alarm bells to go off and then go kill a whole bunch of things. And eventually the XP farming became way better than even like top tier mapping at the time. But anyway, I digress. If the main point is this, if GGG is going back to say, hey, genres of games are something that we want to start playing with, and use different genres of games as a point of inspiration, as a point of a muse for us as game designers to say, what do we want to do next in Path of Exile? Then I'm very excited about it. Whether it's a trading multiplayer experience like Settlers of Catan, in which case I could totally see that. In my wildest imaginations, when I saw this trailer, I'm thinking there's trading going on heavily in this little teaser. Like the teaser's like less than 30 seconds, right? Okay, there's trading going on. There's a greeting between long lost NPCs. What if this was actually a league? This is just wild speculation. We can definitely not say this for sure. But what if this is the league where there's more trade improvements coming along the way? We've already seen some UI and quality of life improvements going for trade. For those of you who don't know, you can now actually click and move all of your available currency, that is one particular type of currency, into a trade window. That was awesome. That came in Necropolis League. That was great. That saved a lot of us a whole bunch of clicks during trading. What if there's more trading improvements? What if whatever sort of trading system that's coming to PoE 2, what if we start to get hints of it here during the Settlers of Kalguur launch? Like, that's my wildest speculation. That's my wildest dream of like, oh man, what if they just surprised us and during like the last league of PoE 1 before PoE 2, there was just an auction house just released. Maybe it's not a full-on auction house for every single commodity, for every single good, but what if it's related to the particular, I don't even know, materials or currency or items that are tied back into the league? What if there was some way to game that kind of system, and this was GGG's attempt to try and bridge that gap? But I don't know. I'm purely speculating. A third thing we can speculate about is endgame bosses. We haven't had a league with like major draw attraction to endgame bosses in a while. I understand that, those are usually tied in with the Atlas, and every year we get Atlas updates, and so we get kind of new editions of the endgame boss. But what if there was a league that offered an endgame boss or an end version boss of a league's content? We have not had that in a while, and whenever we have had it, it has been inconsistent. Either the league has not gone core, and so therefore the boss hasn't gone core, or maybe an aspect of the league has gone core and the boss has been dropped, or maybe the boss has been kept but the rest of the league has been dropped. There's been all sorts of iterations of this. So maybe during the Settlers of Kalguur, we will see an endgame boss that will come in some form or accompaniment. Maybe it will be something that's related to the Brine King, since there's an ocean or island sort of feel to this. Who knows? I know at least for me, the very first time that I played through the second half of what we now think of as the 10 acts, the first time that you fight against the Brine King, that fight, the first time, I'm not saying for the 100th time afterwards, but for the first time that you fought that fight, it was meaningful, it was interesting, it was unique, it was different at the time. If you don't believe me, you can go all the way back to when Oriath launched, and you can just see players. You can go back and rewatch VODs and rewatch YouTube clips from folks way back long ago when those second half of the game was really released and players were first fighting the Brine King. It was unique mechanics. It was unique to the time. It was unique graphics even. It was a unique display for a whole bunch of different moves and features and abilities. Like for players that wanted to have an interactive boss that was not simply just click on it and watch it explode with your traps, your mines, or whatever single target ability that you're using. For players that wanted to have a higher interactive combat and fight, Brine King really felt like that on release. And so I wonder, as we are getting closer and closer towards Path of Exile 2's launch, if maybe this league in July of 2024 would be the opportunity for GGG to bring some of that aspect of a more interactive kind of gameplay to an endgame boss scenario that's actually reminiscent and picking up off of a riff of a previous boss. So maybe there's something to be tied in there. Pure speculation. The fourth thing we can speculate about is quality of life improvements, which I've already mentioned some of those tied in with speculation about trade. You know, there have been a lot of folks saying, what about backpacks? Can we get backpacks back from Affliction? I mean, that's not going to happen until it happens, right? And from what we know from GGG's pattern of interaction, when they say something's not going to happen, it generally doesn't happen. And if it does happen, it's like a decade later, okay? So we're not going to get backpacks back for Path of Exile 1. I would not expect. If I do, you know, I've been wrong before. As I tell my wife, Mrs. Draconis, I've been wrong before. I'll be wrong again. Maybe I'm wrong on this, but I would not expect it. Other sorts of quality of life improvements that I would expect to see relate to similar levels of quality of life improvements that we've seen recently. So for instance, like during the Necropolis League, we're all able to trade all of our particular currency of one type, put it into the trade window at a single time. Maybe we'll see some sort of improvement to IDing items. Maybe we'll see some sort of improvement with interacting with NPCs. Maybe we'll see something similar to sort of what happened when we finally got to invite Lily to our hideout and buy gems from our hideout. That was a massive quality of life thing. So I would expect there to be some level of quality of life improvements, like we said, maybe with Lily, with NPCs, maybe with other sorts of NPC improvements, like maybe map selection, maybe tile selection improvement in terms of hideouts. I know that seems like a strange and a weird thing, but like the number of hideout tiles that we've had available has not been like greatly expanded upon recently. So maybe there will be a whole bunch of new tiles that get added because we've already got PoE 2 assets sort of being developed. And so maybe those can be imported into PoE 1 as a new set of improvements. I could see that. We've seen that before in leagues where when a full amount of data about leagues and previews and trailers come out, there's actually been new hideouts, new hideout decor, and new tile sets that have been made available for hideouts. So I could see that as being something that's a quality of life improvement. It's not going to change how fast your character progresses through the 10x story campaign. It's not going to change your defensive layers for against whatever endgame boss you're going up against, but it'd be a fun quality of life thing that a lot of players might enjoy using. All right, fifthly, we can speculate about how the lore from 325 might tie into PoE 2. We are very, very close to Path of Exile 2's open beta that is coming later on in this year. We're getting closer and closer to PoE 2's full release with every single day. Like nowadays, this summer, it seems like there's just a ton of information that's being peppered and previewed about Path of Exile 2. Like we are getting there to Path of Exile 2. And yet, I almost made an entire video on this, and maybe I still will. It's been really interesting to speculate about lore and about Path of Exile 1 and about Path of Exile 2, and specifically about the hype train that's building around Path of Exile 2. Like, when I've been watching videos or looking at videos from a whole bunch of different people talking about Path of Exile 2, many of them your own favorite content creators and community hosts, like, it's been really interesting to see that a lot of those videos have had, like, a drastically lower number of people excited and talking and engaging and commenting and watching those videos talking about Path of Exile 2 versus just Path of Exile 1 info. Like, as soon as there was any info over the last 24 hours about Path of Exile 1, its next league, it's like the flies descended on a dead carcass. It was just like, all right, guys, there's a feast. We're excited. PoE 1, new league. Whereas, like, here's, like, a video of like 2 hours worth of gameplay of Path of Exile 2, or here's an interview with Jonathan and answering questions about Path of Exile 2. And it's like a dry bone sitting on the side of the road that's already been picked at. Like, there's not nearly as much hype, I feel like, at the moment for PoE 2 as there is just for the next league of PoE 1. Which that's kind of interesting, but we'll save that for another day. I would expect lore in some way, more and more with each and every sort of patch and update coming to Path of Exile 1. I would expect there to be more teases and more connections between PoE 1 and between PoE 2, whether that's about new sorts of landscapes and new sorts of geography, new sorts of cultures, new sorts of regions that we'll be interacting with in PoE 2, or whether or not it's the beginnings of those cultures, the beginnings of those regions as they tie back into PoE 1. So we'll see how the lore shakes out. Moving from lore to gameplay, our sixth thing to speculate about is indeed gameplay and nerfs. By now, if you have played Path of Exile even for 2 leagues, just for 2 leagues, as long as Necropolis was not your first league, then you should know by now every single league includes nerfs. Every single update, every single patch, every single time a player thinks my build is finally safe and they're not going to touch it, guess what? It gets utterly destroyed in the next patch, okay? That's just the way how it works. On rare occasions, there are archetypes, there are specific builds that remain the same, but Grinding Gear Games has learned that secret art that so many games as a service companies have learned, which is that if you want to keep players coming back, you need to give them something fresh and new, and that sometimes means even breaking their old toys and then showing them something new and shiny they can play with instead. So expect nerfs, okay? I have no idea. I have no nerf radar of like, okay, here's like 5 things that are going to be nerfed. I used to have that sort of impression and that sort of sense. I usually got 3 out of 5 things right. I don't have any sense of that right now. There's been like no just singular dominant thing throughout Necropolis League that's like, okay, this is the best and 50% of the league ladder is playing it. There have been different things that have been played and there have been different things that have been good, but there's nothing right now that stands out. There's no one ascendancy that just stands out as the best at everything no matter what. So, I can't make any predictions at the moment about what in particular is going to get nerfed, except I can make this prediction, and I almost put this in the things we can say for sure category, but not quite. You, who's watching, it's just you and me watching and talking right now. It's just you and me. Your favorite build from 324 that you played, that you loved, that you crafted items for, that you spent time flipping currency to build, that you spent time grinding out your next item upgrades in order to be able to progress further, that build, it's getting nerfed, okay? So just expect it. Expect it. Plan on playing something different during 325. Tying into the endgame bosses, the 7th thing I'm speculating about is that there's going to be some sort of endgame system. This upcoming league, I think, is going to compete with other endgame versions of builds and genres that Grinding Gear game developers have tried to thrust upon us or at least offer to us. Whether that was something like Delve, whether that was something like Synthesis, whether that's something like Incursion, something that has got an endgame flavor to it that while you are progressing in top tier maps like tier 17s, tier 16s, etc., something that can compete and can augment your endgame mapping. I don't think that this is just going to be limited to a singular boss where, you know, hey, while you're doing your betrayal board, you know, there's going to be a Katarina that's available every X number of encounters. No. Not quite something like that, but something to where in the endgame you are building towards, maybe that's an item, maybe it is encounter like Katarina, but it would be something that would tie directly back into unique items or progression onto your items that you've already got. Maybe a rare system. Maybe a system, this is just me speculating, hopefully, maybe a system kind of like Synthesis, that instead of just hunting down uniques and finding uniques with endgame bosses, maybe you could just like craft and specifically design your ultra high-end rares, but with an encounter twist to it, right? I think Necropolis crafting, I think it was well received by people who actually wanted to use and were willing to engage with crafting because the items that came out of Necropolis crafting were absolutely bonkers. No one can argue with the results of Necropolis crafting. Everybody in the community hated actually having to do it though, right? That's what everybody was upset about, was this is super tedious. I don't want to trade for these corpses. I don't want to actually go through this process. The results, however, for those who are willing to do it, were absolutely impeccable. So I think there will be some sort of end game sort of, whether that's crafting, whether that's a currency, whether that's an encounter with a boss. I think there will be some sort of level of end game thing that's not tier 17s, but will augment what you do in tier 17s. That's not tier 16s or an augment to that, akin to tier 17s, like tier 17, you know, 0.2, version 2.0. Instead of that, it's something that will be an in-map augmentable thing that will augment your map. Think Delirium, think Incursion, think Metamorph, something that's involved in your mapping experience but is another layer to your mapping experience that you are earning progression even beyond, way beyond when you've got your stones and way beyond when you've got your progression for Maven. Something that is not quite the level of a 1-year expansion, but something that will augment your progression and could continue far into the future with POE 1. I think that's something that's going on. And those of you that are going, Iron, that's way too big for just one expansion. Why would you think that? Well, this is a summer expansion, which oftentimes has been kind of hit or miss in GGG's past. In the past, they did Harvest during the summer. In the past, they did Incursion during the summer. There have been lots of different leagues over the summer that GGG has actually tried really ridiculously ambitious things for a mid-year update that's not quite in the scale of a end of the year or full year on endgame boss, endgame mapping version of a complete augment or overhaul of what we do in the endgame. But oftentimes there's something that's comparable, and it's about halfway through the year that GGG does this. So we'll see. We'll see if that's what's coming. I don't know. I'm purely speculating here. Moving from pure speculation to impure speculation, I fear, I worry, I speculate, use whatever verb you'd like to use. I think that this is going to be the most polished league that we are going to see for a while for POE 1. I think once POE 2 gets released, as there are more players playing in the open beta, as there are more players that are not under restriction to talk about it, I just think anything wrong with POE 2 is going to have to be dealt with and is going to be like an all hands on deck sort of thing. Like, hey, we were really hoping POE 2 would take the company to the next level. We were really hoping POE 2 was going to open up new doors and really bring in a whole bunch of players. Like, POE 2 will not be a success if what happened to Helldivers 2 happens to POE 2. Right? While they're two totally different business models and two totally different games, Helldivers 2 came out, huge release, huge amount of players all of a sudden, seemed like, oh my goodness, this is going to be the next big game on the block. And then within a month or two, it's like, okay, like 90% of the players aren't ever opening that game again. That's not a riff on Helldivers 2. That's just the state of games in general. It's not just Helldivers 2 that did that. Plenty of games have done that, right? Including games that Grinding Gear Games has delayed releases for updates and for leagues because they wanted to wait for that new, supposedly, world-changing game to come out. But anyway, it wasn't world-changing. Players hated it, and it still sucks today. But anyway, enough of railing on that. My expectation is for this league, for 325, to be the most polished, simply because it's going to have the most manpower behind it, and it's going to have the most gracious time delay for players to actually care for it to be good. Like, this is the last league that POE 1 needs to be excellent for a while. Because if this isn't excellent, we're coming up into a fall season and a winter season where there's going to be POE 2 players and POE 2 playing opportunities and POE 2 news opportunities and POE 2 metas and even eventually POE 2 leagues once POE 2 is full on released. So like POE 1 really doesn't need to hit a home run for the company to do well far into the future because POE 2 is where it's going to be at. Players are hopefully going to be gravitating towards POE 2. That's going to be GGG's mindset moving forward. I'm not saying that means that POE 1 is going by the wayside. I'm just saying if POE 1 is going to go by the wayside or take a hit at all, I would expect that to coincide with POE 2's release and continual build up to that release. So, the last time that POE 1 is going to have the amount of polish, the amount of focus, the amount of team that it's going to have, I think is right now. And those of you that are already typing furiously on your keyboards, oh, but Iron, I actually think the opposite is true because once POE 2 is released, then that means a lot of those devs can come back and work on POE 1. I'm going to tell you what, they're not coming back to work on POE 1. They're not. That's not the trajectory of the company. It's not the trajectory of the game. If anything, when people are done working on POE 2, GGG will either pivot to another game, maybe even another genre in and of itself, or they're going to start working on POE 3, or they're going to be working on continual updates and 10 years worth of endgame progression into POE 2, because we know way back with ExileCon with the first one, when POE 2 was first released, one of the draws of making POE 1 and POE 2 two different campaigns with the same shared endgame was that Path of Exile 2 wouldn't have 10 years worth of content to import into the endgame system. So anybody that's saying, well, there's going to be a whole bunch of developers and manpower and reinforcements and talent and time among the staffers of GGG moving from POE 2 to POE 1, I just don't see how that's working. These are two different games. They've got two different game directors. They've got two different developers. Sure, they're working on site together, etc. But these are two different games at this point. The coding is different. Yes, there's some overlaps, but these are two different projects. They've emerged as two different projects. They're being sold as two different projects. Yes, there's going to be some overlap between those two projects and the talents and the people that are able to work on them. But the focus of Grinding Gear Games for the last 7 years, 8 years, has been on making PoE 2 as awesome as it can be. And it's going to continue to be that moving forward. The company cannot handle PoE 2 failing. It just can't. And so they're going to have to bring content. They're going to have to bring endgame content into PoE 2 because pretty soon after the release of PoE 2, we are going to see a whole bunch of people complaining about endgame content or lack thereof. So that's just the nature of the life cycle of these sorts of games. It happened with PoE 1. We can expect it to happen with PoE 2 because it doesn't have a decade worth of endgame improvements like PoE 1 has. So I think this league, Settlers of Kalguur 325, is going to be the league that is the most polished. It's going to be the most finished on release. That doesn't mean it's going to be very finished. It doesn't mean it's going to be bug-free. It doesn't mean that they won't all of a sudden change the very mechanics of the league within a week of release, or maybe even within 36 hours of release. Who knows? But I think that out of any league that is going to be released in between now until, who knows, whenever PoE 1 is shut down, I think this is our best shot at a very polished league. Those are my speculations. I just gave you 8 things that I'm speculating about and 2 things that we all as a community can know for certain. I'd love to hear your speculations and what you know for certain down below in the comments. Thanks so much for joining us today, and I hope the upcoming Settlers of Kalguur 325 League is the league that a Mirror of Calandra drops for you.
Thanks for watching that video. If you'd like more information on any of our discussion points today, you can see them down below in the video description. If you'd also like to join our Discord or support our Patreon, you can do so with the links down below. Thanks again, and big shout out to all of our Patreon supporters.